So day number 5. Today's session was a pretty banal session. It's more or less just the baseline. What you're seeing on the screen is basically me going through my early draft and just making corrections, really just taking whole paragraphs and rewriting them. If you're kind of wondering why I'm doing that, especially this early in the process when I don't even have the first draft completed, the reason why is I am someone who fixes their work as they go. I talked a lot about this, I think, during my first vlog there, back when I was writing every day. But basically, for me, I am someone who, as I go along, I like to make corrections. There's an adage or advice that says you shouldn't do that. There's plenty of books on writing that will tell you no, just go through and finish the draft first and then make corrections. I'm not one of those people. I'm someone who I've said before, I don't really believe in drafts in like the very general sense, like in the very formal sense. To me, your document should be something that just changes and lives and breathes as you go. So you shouldn't be thinking in such binary terms of, okay, here's the first draft, now here's a second draft, here's a third. You should be continually, for me at least, I strive to continually be revising, editing the document as I go, trying to make the whole better. And the reason for this is that when you start thinking in very binary terms, you start thinking about first draft, second draft, thirds, and whatever, you're leaving yourself... Oops. I think I hit the microphone here. But you're leaving yourself, when you think in that type of mindset, you're leaving yourself to make a lot of mistakes, especially early on. When you think of a first draft being just this crappy first draft, and that you go back and you fix it later, you put down a lot of slop, a lot of bad writing. And if you're someone who you care less about the prose, you care less about the beauty of the writing itself, you're not focused as much on lyricism, as much on elements of prose, word choice, sentences, how you structure your paragraphs, etc. And you're much more plot focused, you're much more of, someone that's much more commercial, more genre, more speculative, as a writer, someone maybe just you pens like horror, fantasy, sci-fi, where you care way more about the action that's happening, way more about the story itself, and less about like the prose and how it's read. Then having a more binary approach probably will work for you a lot better. But for me, the issue is there can't really be a bad first draft. There can't be a crappy first draft in the sense of I'm just going to put down all this slop. I'm just going to write all these words, all this slop, and then I'll fix it later. First drafts are going to be bad. They are going to be terrible. But it's kind of, for me, kind of a myth, this idea that you can just write something really crappy and then retool it as you go along. Putting lipstick on a pig is still a pig, to use the old adage. For me, that first draft needs to be good. And it will still be terrible in the sense that it's nowhere near ready, and that I'd probably still be embarrassed to ever read it in public. But it needs to have something. It needs to have a lot to hang my hat on, because I need to come back in my later revisions and have a good foundation. I've talked before that writing for me is like laying tile, where that first piece that you put down sets the standard for everything else. That first piece of tile, if it's off, if it's not center, if it's off angle, the whole piece, the entire mosaic, the entire floor pattern, whatever you're doing it, is going to be off. You need to get that first piece right and then just copy it along. And so for me, that first draft needs to be that initial draft. Once I'm finally done, it needs to be that nice piece of tile. It needs to be right. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to have corrections, revisions. Obviously, there are sections I'm going to toss out completely, what have you. but it needs to be a workable story, and it needs to have a fair amount of work that I will keep in it. And so for me, that's the idea of doing of drafts in general. I think for me has gone away. I still do, just as a matter of like keeping copies. I will save my Word documents as like, draft 1, 2, 3, whatever. But in more of a kind of a broad sense, I view my writing like a living, breathing thing that you're just making corrections as you go on. It's very, very slow. It's like it's like the evolutionary process, right? It's such a gradual series of changes that you make that you can't really pinpoint where one draft ends and another begins. That's my hope. And that's kind of my goal with this story, is eventually get to the point where I look at my work and I go, it's different enough. It is different enough from what I had before, that I will call this now my second draft or my third draft, whatever. But as to how many corrections I've made to drafts specifically, I couldn't tell you. And I'd encourage you to think that way, to start thinking of your work in a bit more of a respectful term, to not just pass off bad writing as the well, it's a first draft, of course everything first drafts can be bad. To have a bit more respect for your work, to really focus on making that first draft shine. I know for some people that leads to like this complete analysis paralysis. It leads to this sort of thing where you're so crippled that you never ever get to the end of your book to begin with. Certainly. I myself, I've talked about before, right? This book is only maybe 60% written, perhaps actually down on the page. But on the other side of that, the 60% I have down now is much, much better than, in terms of quality, than what it would be if I had just a regular first draft. If I just put a first draft down and scribbled out the plot and made sure all these things hit, well, that would be lovely, but what I would have down on the page would be a much more inferior draft. The 60% that I have done would look far, far inferior to what I have now. So for me, it's better to not have the complete picture yet, but to have a lot of points that are done and fleshed out and have them be really, really well. Perhaps part of that's just my schooling. Just because when you're going for your MFA, they require you to get to have something done, have some sort of polished work there, and often people don't come in with full stories. My book Crease was finished. I ended up actually adding a whole new set subplots and sections to it after I graduated, but it was a finished book. But most people, they'll get maybe 30,000 words of a story done, and it looks freaking good. Like it's a good 30,000. It may not be complete, but it's a good 30,000. It's a 30,000 you're not going to really need to retool those maybe first 100 pages or whatever. And so for me, that's how I carry it on. I'd rather have some really quality work and then eventually get that initial draft done, for lack of a better word, and go back later on and have a good foundation to start building off of. Because going in with just a bad foundation, a bad first draft, you're not going to suddenly miraculously re-edit it to the point where it's good. You're going to have to throw out whole sections. You're going to have to do complete rewrites. And while that can happen, while I've done that before, even with my current process, it ends up basically trying to make something work that won't, at least in my experience. And so that's often why I don't do this. That's often why you'll see me on here deleting whole paragraphs and then putting new paragraphs in above. That's simply me tinkering. That's simply me going through it. And I guess the last thing I'll say to it is, at this stage, it's a really good technique to get back into the work. Someone who just got back, someone who took basically the summer off, took a few months off from writing, to now jump back in to a project you haven't seen in a few months. It's a good thing to kind of start retooling, start retweaking some of these paragraphs. It gets you familiar. Writing is a courtship. I fervently believe that. It's poetic, obviously, to say that, but I think it is. I think when you go through your work, it is something of kind of a courtship process. You're getting familiarized with it. You're getting to know it. You can't just jump in day one and be ready to pick up where you left off after a period of time. Not for me, at least. For me, it's a courtship. It's a getting refamiliarized. It's taking a little bit of time to reconnect with the piece. And I will say, I'm the first one to say that I do tend to get very hippy dippy, whatever, woo, whatever you want to call it, about my work. I do have that kind of like spiritual ideal about the work, the way I approach it. It's just my process. And so there it is. That was today. A lot of tinkering here. I'm probably gonna spend the rest of August probably retinkering, and then maybe we'll go into some more uncharted territory after that. But for now, it's making this initial draft sound really, really good. That's been the focus, and that's where we're at right now.